The Tsenkethi stared in slack-jawed astonishment as the human stepped out from his small recon ship directly into the blistering sun, icy fear gripping their hearts at the thought that this alien's insane bravery would get his entire species killed on first contact. "Take cover!" shouted Thule, the Tsenkethi leader, his voice raw with dread. But Scott Brown, the lone human astronaut, just smiled calmly, completely unaffected by the intense solar radiation that would reduce any Tsenkethi to a blistered, agonized corpse within minutes. "It's all right," Scott said. "We humans evolved under the rays of a yellow sun. It can't hurt us." Scott's words sent a chill through the assembled Tsenkethi. They glanced nervously at each other, realizing the immense tactical advantage this gave the human visitors. They could attack in broad daylight with impunity, while the Tsenkethi cowered in their shelters. Some of Thule's advisors saw an opportunity. If they could just harness this human resistance, strengthen themselves with it. "You must tell us your secret," Thule demanded. Scott frowned. "I can't. Not without further diplomatic talks between our species first." Thule's face contorted with rage. He barked an order, and Scott was swarmed by guards, dragged away at gunpoint to a holding cell. There, listening through the walls, he heard Tsenkethi scientists planning to splice human DNA into their genome, to make this power their own. Scott's heart raced as the truth sank in. If the Tsenkethi succeeded, it would shift the galactic balance of power dramatically, allowing them to conquer and oppress human worlds at will. He had to find a way to escape, to protect his species' biological secrets, before this cold war of ignorance and fear ignited into an interstellar conflagration that could cost billions of human lives. The fate of humanity itself now rested on Scott's shoulders. He took a deep breath, alone in his cell, and started looking for a way out. Scott paced restlessly in his cell, his mind racing to come up with an escape plan. The walls were featureless, smooth polymer with no visible doors or windows. But Scott knew appearances could be deceiving. He ran his fingers along the surface, probing for weaknesses, hidden sensors, anything he could exploit. His years of training kicked in as he mentally cataloged every detail. There. A hairline seam, nearly invisible. Scott pressed it experimentally and felt a slight give. A concealed access panel. Now, he just needed to open it. He pulled a small multi-tool from his boot, a parting gift from his engineer friend Jax. "Never know when you'll need to fix something," Jax had said with a wink. Scott popped open the multi-tool's miniature plasma cutter and carefully traced the panel's edges. The cutter flared bright blue, slicing through polymer like butter. Scott caught the panel as it fell away, revealing a tangle of circuitry and glowing conduits. Alarms shrieked in the distance as Scott shorted the locking mechanism with a jolt from his suit's power cell. The cell door clicked open. Scott slipped into the corridor, mentally calling up the compound layout he had memorized upon arrival, always planning for the worst. Left, right, up a level. He ducked into alcoves to avoid patrolling guards. Barging through a final door, Scott stumbled into a research lab, banks of equipment humming along the walls. And there, in a cylindrical tank, a floating double helix. His DNA. Scott recoiled in horror as realization hit. They were already trying to steal his genetic code. Shouts echoed from the hall. No time to lose. Scott upended tables, smashed delicate instruments. He pumped a full power cell into the DNA sequencers, frying their circuits. Snatching a data chit, he downloaded the research and pocketed it as evidence. Sprinting now, he slammed through a door marked with the Tsenkethi glyph for communications. Technicians gaped as Scott shoved them aside, hands flying across the alien controls. He punched in the locator code for his ship and prayed the comm protocols were similar enough. "Mayday, mayday. Betrayed by the Tsenkethi. They're after our DNA, our immunity. Destroy any samples aboard and await further instructions. I'll try to negotiate, but prepare for hostilities. Brown out." Static hissed from the panel. Scott held his breath. A tense beat later, his captain's voice crackled across the alien stars. Understood. We've got your back, Scott. Bring our people home. Deleting the transmission log, Scott raised his hands as Tsenkethi guards flooded the room, rifles leveled at his chest. Take me to Thule, he said evenly. It's time we talked face to face. Scott marched into the conference room flanked by a pair of heavily armed Marines, their faces grim behind polarized visors. Thule stood at the far end of the table, his scales still smudged with soot from the battle. The Tsenkethi leader's eyes narrowed as Scott approached. I hope you understand the gravity of what has transpired here, Scott said, his voice hard. Your people's reckless actions nearly plunged our species into a catastrophic war. Thule's tail lashed in agitation. The rebels acted without my authority. I assure you, I had no part in their schemes. And yet, it was your scientists who first sought to steal our genetic secrets, Scott countered. That kind of dangerous thinking festered under your rule. Thule's gaze fell to the table. I cannot deny that. In my desperation to protect my people, I allowed fear to cloud my judgment. But I swear to you, I never intended for this to escalate into violence. Scott leaned forward, his hands planted on the table. Intentions matter little in the face of consequences. Your civilization stands on the brink of collapse, torn apart by the very prejudices you failed to confront. Thule flinched as if struck. What would you have me do? He asked, his voice strained. My people are frightened. They see your strength and fear subjugation. Then show them another path, Scott urged. Work with us, not against us. My original offer still stands. A joint research initiative to develop treatments for your people's vulnerabilities. Thule was silent for a long moment, his claws flexing against the tabletop. You would still extend the hand of cooperation even after all this? I believe in the potential for peace between our kinds, Scott said solemnly. But understand this, any further acts of aggression will be met with swift and decisive action. We will defend ourselves and our allies with the full might of our military. Thule nodded slowly. I hear your words, Scott Brown, and I accept your offer. Let us forge a new future together, one built on trust and mutual respect. He extended a clawed hand across the table. Scott clasped it firmly, sealing their pact. As he did, he couldn't help but feel the weight of the moment. Two species, once poised on the precipice of war, now taking their first tentative steps toward lasting peace. But even as the handshake ended and talks of cooperation began in earnest, Scott knew their trials were just getting started. The road ahead would be fraught with challenges, each one threatening to unravel the fragile threads of diplomacy. For now, though, he allowed himself a glimmer of hope. They had weathered the storm of treachery and violence. Perhaps, with care and diligence, they could yet steer their civilizations toward a brighter tomorrow. As the meeting adjourned and Scott strode from the room, he caught the eye of a young Tsenkethi aide, the same one who had guided him upon his first arrival. In the aide's gaze, Scott saw a flicker of something new, a tentative spark of trust, the first fragile shoot of understanding pushing through the rubble of suspicion. It was a start, however small. And in that humble beginning, Scott glimpsed the promise of a future where humans and Tsenkethi might stand together as allies, even friends, united by their common hopes, rather than divided by their darkest fears. Scott Brown stood motionless in the research facility's control room, his eyes locked on the monitor displaying the rogue Tsenkethi squad. The leader, a towering figure with scales gleaming an unnatural blue, pressed a pulse rifle against the temple of Dr. Ilara Chen, Scott's chief geneticist. You have 1 hour, human, the Tsenkethi snarled, baring razor-sharp teeth. Either you allow us to distribute this gift to our people, or we start executing your team, one by one. The comm channel cut off abruptly, plunging the room into silence. Scott's fingers dug into his palms as he weighed his options. The coded sequences in his DNA held secrets beyond imagining, secrets that could reshape the galaxy if weaponized. But the cost... Sir, his Exo's voice crackled over the ship-to-surface link. We're armed and ready, awaiting your order to initiate orbital strike. Scott's chest tightened. He pictured the facility reduced to ash along with everyone inside. Dr. Chen, the other researchers. All the progress they'd made, gone in an instant. He strode to the lab's main computer, fingers flying over the keys as he pulled up the genetic data. The artificial sequences glowed on the screen, a testament to humanity's mysterious origins. Who had created them? And why? A proximity alarm blared. On the security feed, Scott watched Thule and a contingent of loyalist troops massing outside the facility. "Brown!" Thule's voice boomed through the external speakers. "We cannot allow those traitors to escape with the enhancements. Give the order to your ship. We'll handle any survivors." Scott's teeth clenched. He thought of the young Tsenkethi aide he'd seen that day after the peace talks. The hope in those alien eyes. His fingers hovered over the comm panel. One word and it would all be over. But at what cost to the future they'd fought to build? Scott took a deep breath and keyed the channel open. "This is Brown. Belay that strike order. I repeat, do not fire." He turned to face the door, steeling himself for what came next. "It's time we face this head-on, together."
You have reached the end of the story. If you enjoyed this story and want to support us, please leave a like and subscribe to our channel, and for every comment that says 88, I will heart every single one of them. Thank you for your time.